Hi, Stephanie. So we're recording. I'm Claire Venus from Culture Northumberland, and I'd ask Stephanie if she'd like to record a Zoom conversation with me, just to tell me a little bit more about Arts and Heritage, her role there, projects that they've been working on, how it's been feeling this last kind of year or two, and things that she was looking forward to for the future. So hi, Stephanie, welcome to the chat. Feel free to start wherever you'd like, and let us know what how things are over at Arts and Heritage for you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to have a chat with new people and new faces. So my name is Steph Allen. I'm the Executive Director of Arts and Heritage. I've been in post for about 3.5 years now, I think, something like that. So Arts and Heritage are based in Hexham in Northumberland, but we actually work right the way across the country. We're a fairly dispersed structure, so there's about 6 of us in the team, but only 3 live in the northeast. And the rest are spread out across the country. I am actually on the Welsh borders in Hereford, so actually nowhere near Hexham and Northumberland.
It's amazing, isn't it? Amazing to hear that, how that all works behind the scenes. Thank you.
Exactly, it's all right, but it means, in a way, this last year, it means we were kind of G'd up in advance. We were already working in a remote way. And coming together once a month, either in the office in Hexham that we share with Hexham Poetry Festival, Book Festival, sorry, or various events and venues that wherever we were opening a project. All our projects are done in partnership with other venues, other organisations, artists, curators. So we use that as a way of us all coming together, having a conversation, catching up with what we're all working on. And I think that's been the biggest thing, is actually we've not physically seen each other now since March. I think March last year. So we're actually seeing each other on Monday for the first time. So that would be really nice to actually see the team.
Wow, where are you meeting up?
We have a project meeting at Newcastle University, and then we're going out for an early Christmas lunch and having Eritrean food in Newcastle. So it'd be quite nice to actually have the team together again, which will make a huge difference. But I guess we've all got used to just seeing each other from the shoulders up over the past 1.5 years, and then some of us in pairs coming together at various projects. I think in that sense, we've been quite lucky. I think compared to a venue-based organisation who've had to worry about the overheads and the costs of keeping things going and all the massive staff structure and everything else, we're quite live. We can sort of hop around, and we've kept going throughout this whole period. Although now I'm looking back going, I really wish there'd been some furlough along the line somewhere. For most of us, I think we had 1 member of staff that was furloughed through her own choice, through work commitments and personal commitments. But the rest of us have kind of worked through. And I think at the beginning, it was really nice to sort of reformat and rethink about who are we working for and with. I think our real focus at the beginning of last year was to get money that we had into artists' pockets. So we spent a lot of time looking at where we were halfway through projects and paying a stipend to any artists that were waiting for an outcome from us, because in recognition that they were all expecting to hear about a commission or a project, and then suddenly everything was halted. And it was halted mainly because all our partner organisations were closed. So when the museums shut and with the organisations shut, we couldn't deliver work in those spaces. And we also then pivoted very, very quickly to go, well, what can we do? And did a series of projects called Blue Sky Museums, which can all be found online. And what we decided to do is put out there an artist brief that we'd written previously for an existing project. So one that had already been realised, that already a project had been developed. Let's put it out there, but then make a call out for really unrealisable, fantastical ideas, and sort of recognise we were paying artists for their ideas, not necessarily to make the work, but just to come up with something, to use their imaginations and come up with something. And it was a really challenging prospect. I think some people really decided they could not think creatively in this environment, whereas others really were like, I'm loving the opportunity to really start exploring how I could respond to that venue or that heritage story. And all of those we've then posted on our website. So you can find all those on Arts and Heritage's website under Blue Sky Museums. So that was a really nice thing for us to get into the zone of, all right, we're in a different world for a period of time. I think we also then picked up some projects with the National Trust during their restructure. So we've been delivering 6 projects for those over the past year. And then since March, I think restarted all our programs and projects that were almost in hiatus. So I think at the last count, since March to now, we've opened 14 projects in various places across the country. So I think we're now at the point now of going, okay, Christmas is, we really need a break.
And I think that the sector really feels that, you know, I've just plugged back in after maternity leave, and I think the sector is feeling that, like, oh, especially like you say, with not being furloughed and things working at that pace, that brain space that it's taken to come up with new ideas. And I love the way you described the blue sky museums. I did catch one of them in one of your newsletters and click through it at the time. I remember it was beautiful. Yeah, just kind of recognizing that brain space that has been online for so long, and looking forward to a slightly sort of slight change of pace and tapering off towards the end of the year.
Exactly,
I think people are.
Exactly. I've absolutely said we are having a proper break this Christmas. The office is shut. We're not doing anything. And, you know, everyone just spend the time reading, relaxing, thinking, use it for your own development to kind of just work out that you're in the right space for when we come back in the new year, I guess.
Yeah, and we really need that downtime for our creativity, don't we? I think sometimes, you know, we think we can keep pushing on, and we definitely can for an amount of time, but the mental load definitely at one point or another needs to be put down for new ideas to grow and for kind of little inspirations to pop in.
Exactly, and I think there's been so much amazing stuff online, you know, so conferences and talks and events. It's almost like the world has hugely opened up over the past year and a half, where we can, you know, sort of engage differently with each other and access talks all over the world. But then are we having time to actually filter that through and go, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to use it? How are we going to go forward and build on that?
And what's possible now that wasn't when we all stopped working the way we used to work, you know, that side of things as well, isn't it? And also for the people, like you say, you're working in partnership, but also for the artists that you work with and commission, they'll have new thoughts and new brilliant ideas about how they want to work and maybe how they don't want to work because of the pandemic. So that'll be really interesting to see what happens with all that too.
Exactly. I think we've seen a lot of artist practice go in different directions. They've been making new partnerships through lockdown. I think the trickiest bit were realising projects that were halfway through before lockdown hit. Almost the ones that were ready to go were sort of at the gate, desperate to start again. As soon as lockdown lifted, we had straight off the bat several projects open in quick succession. I think the trickier ones have been where they've been halfway through the planning process, and artists in the meantime have had to just sit and wait and think and wait. And they've had new opportunities, they've had to find incomes from other places, they've had new ideas, new conversations, and then have to then come back and realise a project that was pitched 2-3 years ago. And I think I have such sympathy for people who were in that stage of the process, because I think that's where it's hit the hardest as far as we can see it.
And you go through that feeling of going, I don't know whether I want to do it anymore. You know, you just do that as part of the creative process. So like you say, to have kind of had to sit with it and for things to sort of stagnate and feel different, or maybe you want to change something. It's that must have been really tough. But I suppose you'll have also seen the other side of that, where it'll have injected lots of creative energy and something completely new and unique. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about one of your projects, you know, in Northumberland, if there is one that you can reference. I know you're working nationally, but it would be good to know about a Northumberland one.
Yeah, so I was sort of thinking about the most recent, one of the programmes we run. So the way that Arts and Heritage is structured is we have sort of 4 pillars of work that we do that cross-cut across each other. Essentially, we have a programme of skills development programme, which is really aimed at museums to upskill them to work with artists, learn new skills, reach out and then commission a work that responds to their heritage venue or story. We then do our own projects, commission our own work. We run a lot of advocacy programs, so working with curators, volunteers, museums, heritage sites about how do we do the best for you as the sector? How do we shout on your behalf? And then finally, we do consultancy. So we work with a series of organisations. We're working at the moment all the way from Scotland down to the Hampshire coast on projects where people have come to us and said, can you work with us on this? So it's a really varied portfolio of work we've been working on across a very broad area. But I guess the one project we were halfway through delivering was Meeting Point. Meeting Point's our core programme. We are funded by Arts Council England as a sector support organisation, so we joined the portfolio this last round. And as part of that, we run Meeting Point. It had 2 previous iterations funded through the Museum Resilience Fund, and this time through Arts Council. And it really is to tackle or support both the museums and artists to make new connections, forge new relationships, and learn each other's languages and ways of working with each other. So we start on the museum side, really helping them to identify what stories they're trying to tell, what conversations they're trying to have, from whose perspective are they looking at their histories, how are they telling their stories, how do they select what to choose and what not to choose, and how to really explode that so an artist can come in and unpick it and find the story they want to tell within that collection. So it's a real kind of, the beginning of the programme is really working closely with the museums to almost let go of control over the narrative or the story of their space and say, actually, what's interesting? What conversations do you want to have? Who would you want to be talking with? And then let an artist respond to that. And I think that's the hardest bit of the programme, is kind of a curator's role really is to really focus down on what they're, what they're about and what their collection's about and their stories. And it's almost saying, let the artist do some of that work, let them dig around and have a discussion and tell you what they find interesting about what you're doing, and then make something that lets visitors feel that in a different way. So instead of reading a panel on a wall or a publication, let them see what the story is they're trying to tell and engage with it differently. So that's really what the Meeting Point programme does. And the latest round, Meeting Point 3, we started 2.5 years ago. I think when I first started, we started this programme. Because it starts with this kind of skills workshops development process, it takes quite a long time. And then we want the artists to have at least a year on site to get to know the people, get to know the venue, really understand the story they're trying to tell and the work they're trying to make. So we just launched the first one of those, which was in Sheffield before we went into lockdown, which was, she says, looking at her list. I've just lost it. Oh, Melbourne at Kelham Island. And then we locked down. And so we had a quick succession of things to open when we came back. I think the one nearest to you that we opened with was Lindsay Mendick and Dominic Watson at Washington Old Hall, which is a National Trust property in Sunderland. And they'd been doing workshops before lockdown with the local residents about myth and storytelling and kind of the stories that are around Washington. And then what they did is represent this in a 3D sculptural installation throughout the entire hall. And it's completely bonkers. There are so many different characters and sort of people they've pulled out from the stories they heard from the local communities and created them in papier-mâché and food and various other odd substances, ceramics. Everything is thrown at this. It's a beautiful installation and still on. So people can go see that one at Washington Old Hall. I guess another one that we've just done a film and a presentation of was Sophie Dixon working at the Grace Darling Museum. So she again was approaching Grace's story from a new perspective, looking at actually for Grace, what did the entire thing feel like? What was the experience for her? And she's made this beautiful 3-screen digitized installation, which is telling the story from Grace's perspective, using objects from the museum, collecting things from the collection. And so I think she started 3D scanning them and then placing them within the film. So it's this beautiful film that's seen from Grace's viewpoint, but with objects that are currently behind cases, but now in their real positions in the house, in the boat, what was happening. But it also really tackles how Grace must have felt about the attention she got after this. So it's not a really linear storytelling. It's very emotive, but talks through how it must be to have the spotlight placed upon you, and really echoes with stories we're now hearing, celebrity culture and magazines, and how people get this real intense spotlight from the whole country talking about them for a period of time, and how you handle and deal with that. But because of lockdown, we also, so that was a 3-screen installation at the museum, but we also made a digital version, which Sophie is now looking to screen at various festivals. We did a talk and a presentation online, just so we could make sure we got some Cultural Recovery Fund money, and that money really was for us to make sure that those works that we commissioned during Meeting Point 3 had a life beyond just being in the gallery space, because we were aware how few people during that lockdown period will be able to get to those spaces and engage with the work in a way that we really wished they could have done.
I think that's an amazing point to just pause on for just a second, Steph, because obviously there's a big chunk of time passed, but like you say, people have either made decisions or for or against visiting venues, or consumed online, but then sort of burnt out with that because we've spent so much more time on screen. So being able to just go actually and question that back to the artist, does this have another life? Could this have another life? What would that be? How can that become more accessible then for people who still perhaps aren't confident leaving their homes, or just maybe a different group, reach out to a different group that wouldn't ordinarily visit a museum? And I think those sorts of questions are really exciting, and it's nice to hear those kind of bubbling up. Did you say the screening is taking place or is planning on being taken?
We had one screening and a discussion with the artist last week.
Okay,
and I'll have a look to see, because I saw something today that she's pitching it to another film festival, so it might be available.
Might be an opportunity
in different times. Yeah, so keep an eye on our newsletter and website, because we're promoting all of those as and when they happen. I think we did another one where we worked with a digital artist to animate the installation. We worked with Todd Hanson in Port Sunlight in Liverpool. Or the Wirral, I should say, sorry Scousers, if anyone's watching. And we actually digitized that, so we had this kind of animation of it disappearing into itself, into a black hole at the end. And like, things like, how can we involve more creatives, bring more people in and share the work more broadly through a network of not just the artist, but all the people, the auxiliary people that work on those projects alongside the artists. We also have a filmmaker and a photographer on and recruited as part of the programme. So we always make films of every work that we do, and photographs, and all of those are online as a kind of archive of each project, because they're temporary, because they're not there the whole time. We've always built in a way of capturing it, but it's become even more important, I think, over the last year and a half. And the last bit we added to the programme because of that is started to employ critical writers, so that we could pay a writer to go and see a work and commission a piece of writing in response to it. So again, we had this kind of emotive piece of text that we, the artist and the museum, could use to talk about the work after it had been there, and pull out some of the themes and strands that were within it.
Amazing. So that's less of a review and more of a sort of creative piece of writing. Yes. Response to, wow, that's really cool.
It was something that was fed back to us. We were part of the Mapping Contemporary Art in the Heritage Environment conference a couple of years ago with Newcastle University.
I was there. I did that. There. Yes, I was there because I was doing a freelance role with National Trust around Anya's installation at Lindisfarne Castle.
Yes, yeah. So we've really been working since that conference, although it happened a couple of years ago. We've spent a lot of time pulling threads out of learning from that, and how we involve them and how we embed them in the programme. So we also, during lockdown, we've done 2 programmes that have been follow-ons from that with the university. One which was Volunteer Voices, which was really looking at what's the volunteer experience in heritage sites, how they are essentially the first line of interpretation. You're so reliant on the volunteers when you put an art installation into place in a heritage site. But actually, are those volunteers engaged in the process? Do they get a chance to talk to the artist? Do they get given the language and the way to talk about the work? Even if they don't like it, how do you help them have a voice and talk about it, and talk about it to visitors who are coming in and experiencing it for the first time, and sort of empower the volunteers to have a role within that project creation? We always try and ensure we have volunteers on the selection panel of projects, so that when we know we're embedding people from across an organisation in the selection process, and that it's not just something done to the people who love that place and tell its story and advocate for it all the time. They need to be able to sort of see why the project is there and what the artist's intentions are.
Yeah,
so we've done a lot of work around that.
Yeah, I think as well, because you don't know what you don't know when you've worked in arts and culture all of your career, which I'm making a presumption, but I have, and I know sometimes when I go somewhere with my husband who isn't in the arts, it's so interesting to just hear his perspective and hear his sets of questions around things. And with working with volunteers and working with young people throughout my career, the amount of time a young child has just stopped me in my tracks with their question, you know, when I've articulated something or I've been supporting an artist, and you're like, oh yeah, this is really important to hear another point of view and to try and weave that in and try and understand how people might be meeting that artist or artwork that we might not have thought about. It's great.
Yeah, what questions will they be asking when they come through? They're a great representative community of the people you're trying to talk to. And so using them and working with them has been really, really valuable. And I think the other follow-on from volunteer voices that we developed is something called All Our Histories, which was a roundtable discussion about sort of representation and barriers within contemporary commissioning. Where are the kind of Black and minority ethnic voices? Where are the alternative stories? How do we engage more artists in those heritage sites? What's in it for them? Why do they want to come through the door? And actually, how do you make it an experience that's valuable, a learning experience for both groups of people in the commissioning process? And how do you sort of break down some of those barriers to commissioning work and make artists want to work in those venues or have an appetite to work in those venues? So we've done a lot of work around that as well. And then the final bit we've just set up is a resource hub, which was we secured some money from Art Fund. And so all the learning from all our projects, all the research projects, everything we've been doing, we've started putting on our resource hub, which is free for everyone to access and contains templates of like practical things like templates for artist contracts and a how-to guide and how to write a marketing brief, how to write a contract, all of those kind of basic principles, but then also some expanded case studies on how the process went with an artist, why a museum or a heritage site wanted to work with an artist, what was it that inspired them. So we've tried to keep it really broad for people who are interested in commissioning work or artists and don't know where to start. It's you just have to enter a password, your email address and register, but then it's all free. And we, as part of that, we've done some podcasts and some commissioned writing, various bits and pieces of information, which is much more about the broader sector and kind of who's making this work and how do we sort of get it all in one place following that conference. How do we collect all that information and keep that community going? And I think as part of that, we finally commissioned a curatorial forum, so a space where curators can come together and discuss and talk about commissioning work, because quite often they're the only people in an organisation that are working on a contemporary programme. Everyone else is working on the gardens or the buildings or collection care or property maintenance or audience or expectations. And it's like, actually, as the curator, as a commissioner, how do you talk to your peer groups? How do you test ideas? How do you work through problems and issues that have been occurring, especially over this year? I hope it's proved a really valuable space for people to come together once every couple of months and share their frustrations, especially for those that were furloughed or not working. I think it's been a great way for them to keep their hand in and have a discussion with their peers about how they're feeling, have inspirational chats, share information with each other, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that thing, isn't it? It's just human connection of how one person's feeling, and that then reflects how another person might have not quite formulated that thought yet. And that's amazing to hold that space for everybody. I was just wondering as well if you'd ever had an artist kind of be really inspired by a space or a building or a museum and kind of come to you and say, what about this as an idea? Could we do something? Has it ever worked that way around?
It can do. It hasn't so far. I think we do get emails from artists kind of, can you help me with this or talk me through this? We've done some mentoring and artist support. We've not really had many come to us going, we want to realise this idea and make it happen. It's really been venue first, but I think we want to do more of that. I think we have spent the last 4 years very much focused on how we support the heritage sector to work with artists. And I think the next step for us is absolutely how do we help more artists work in the heritage sector? How do we make those connections? How can we support those relationships and provide some support for them.
It'd be really interesting to think about that further and talk about that further over the next little while, because we're just looking at Culture Northumberland with artists and creative freelancers about where they are right now, so taking everything into account over the last couple of years and how they've pivoted their practice, but also making space for being visionary around things, and a lot of the time there's a kind of bit of a hamster wheel of funding application to funding application and not much kind of foot off the pedal, and it works obviously the same when you run an organisation. But what we're trying to kind of look at and make space for is kind of where are the kind of missing links, and if they haven't quite figured that out yet, kind of coming together and working that through as a bit of a collective. So one of the things is definitely around kind of online presence and marketing and talking about your practice. There's a lot of artists kind of really struggle with that, and of course that'll be the first kind of shop window that any venue or museum or person behind organisation would go to. So we're looking at that and what we might be able to do with that, and I think what you're describing, there could be kind of a really nice place there to kind of make space for more of that conversation.
Absolutely, because I think we've done a lot of work, you know, in our kind of mentoring support side of things. We have done some work with artists about how to change your language and the way you're pitching an idea to allow it to hit with a heritage site or a museum, because it is about, I think, as I said earlier, about that kind of the two different languages and two different work ethics and way of working, and how you bridge that gap between so that you can have an equal conversation where you both get excited and passionate about making something together. And so I think we're absolutely really keen on that kind of, how do we support more artists to enter that space and take the initiative forward and make the projects they want to make. And I think that's absolutely what came out, or one of the strands that came out of the All Our Histories, is no matter how many briefs you write and how loose you write a brief, you're still dictating the venue, the story, the thing you want people to focus on. And how do you empower more artists to make that choice themselves and say, we want to work with that venue or that story or that space and tell what the story we want to tell, rather than responding to someone else's agenda or outline of what they want to explore.
It's so interesting, really interesting to hear about all of that. And looking forward, you mentioned obviously you've had some funding from Arts Council, so you are an MPO now, and it's kind of your role is with kind of supporting, and are you looking at that application process again?
Yes, yeah, so we're just getting our heads around the next MPO round, which I think we'll have to have an application in by April. So we've got that strand of work. I know. I mean, what's not nice, I guess what we've had chance to do over the last year is really interrogate the business plan. You know, so we've had time to sit and talk as a team about what do we want to achieve, what impact are we looking to have. We've rewritten our kind of vision and mission and values and all of those things so that they all align with the new direction of travel. So we've kind of done a bit of the early work, but it's now, how do we put that into practice? How do we make the biggest impact in the sector? I mean, we're only a team of 5. So although we're working across the country on this vast array of things, we also need to hone in what's having the most impact. Where are we the most successful? How do we grow that? So that's definitely where we'll be focusing for the next couple of months.
Oh, fascinating. Well, it's really good to hear about all of the different projects. You've told us so much, and what I'm going to do is I'll embed this into a blog on the Culture Northumberland website, and then put lots of the links that you've talked about underneath, so people can kind of see some of that. There sounds to be some really brilliant resources on your website, but also really exciting to hear about the visual side as well, and just being able to kind of click in and watch a film and understand more of the process that way, and more of the artwork that way, the relationship. So thanks for sharing all of that, Steph. That's fantastic.
Pleasure.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add in while we're chatting?
Yeah, so a couple of plugs, I guess. We've got this real 6 months period where we're doing a lot of sort of focusing on us, like our past and our future, and kind of talking about what we do as an organisation before we embark on a new programme of projects. So I think what we've got is we've got the Meeting Point 4 projects going live at the moment, which are all in the Midlands, and the next round of Meeting Point in the South has just appointed all their artists. The final round of the funded programme, we're really sort of broadening out what heritage is and what it could mean. So we're looking at intangible heritage, We're looking at artist-led stories, all of those things that kind of haven't been covered. Oh, and civil societies and how that impacts on heritage and identity. So those are the sort of themes we're exploring. And I think the final thing is we have a publication coming out next year, which is our 10th anniversary publication, very much looking backwards at our roots, how Timandra and Judith, who founded the organisation, founded it, why it was developed, and those kind of initial projects that have laid the foundation for what we're doing now. So keep an eye out for that in March, I think, although we've finally got the hard copies. We're just talking about the launch and how we might do that. And then in April, at the moment, we're talking of some kind of conference, so some kind of public discussion forum where we can share some of these ideas and have a bigger conversation. So they're coming up, but they're just sort of, we're just forming a shape around them at the moment.
Yeah, well, we'll share all of that with our Northumberland Artists and Creatives Facebook group and on the website as well. So anytime I get the Arts and Heritage newsletter, I always scroll through and see what the Northumberland plugs are that I can pull out and share with people. So I'll do that as well. But thanks so much. I'll stop recording there. But thanks so much for spending half an hour with me today. And I'll send everything over to everybody at Arts and Heritage, and it'll be out there pretty soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Claire. It's been great.